Chapter 28 is about plant structure and growth. A quick introduction to plants. Of the 6 different kingdoms for classification, plants are in the Plantae kingdom. So there's a few characteristics that makes a plant being in this kingdom. First is their cells have a cell wall. Plants should be or are autotrophs, which means that they undergo photosynthesis, and plants are also multicellular. Now, there are different categories of plants. For chapter 28, the type of plant that we're focusing on are angiosperms. So angiosperms have the characteristics that I just mentioned, but they are flowering plants. 90% of all plants are angiosperms. And a little bit more about what it means to flower. They produce seeds within a fruit, and they obviously have flowers and fruits. Those are key adaptations. Whenever you see the word adaptation, that means it's a process over time in which a species or a group of organisms they became better suited for their environment over time, which plays into evolution in the unit that we just covered. Understanding how plants are organized is the first thing that we need to understand about plants. So plants have organ systems. Again, much like us, but different, because these systems, they need to benefit the plant and keep the plant alive. So there's 3 organ systems that we're going to focus on: root system, stem system, and the leaf or leaves system. Organs, to remind you, are several types of tissues that carry out some sort of function, and different types of tissues that work together. So going into, well, what's a tissue? It's a group of cells that perform a specialized function. And in plants, we're going to focus on dermal tissue, vascular tissue, and ground tissue. And sometimes the names kind of tell you, what they are even before we've learned about them. So like dermal, we know like humans have the dermis, the skin. So this is going to be the outside. So hopefully some of this stuff will be pretty straightforward and easy. Knowing what tissues are, knowing that it's a group of cells that perform a specialized function, well, what types of cells are we looking at with plants? We're going to be looking at the xylem, again, cell or cells, phloem cells, and parenchyma cells as well. And we'll get more into what exactly those do and what are their purpose and function soon. Of the 3 basic plant organs, they reside in 2 different systems. The first system is called the shoot system, and this system resides above ground and includes the 2 types of organs, plant organs, stems, and leaves. The second type of system, and this one's pretty easy, root system, typically underground as we all think of it being, and it includes the root organs. Now, vascular plants rely on these 2 systems. The shoot system would be primarily for photosynthesis, and the underground system primarily for absorption from the soil. So the first organ system that we're going to talk about in plants is the root organ system. The purpose of the root system is to anchor the plant, absorb lots of water and minerals, and store sugar, starches, carbohydrates. The root system also occasionally has root hairs. Now, root hairs are finger-like, tiny finger-like extensions of the epidermal cells, which will greatly increase the surface area for water and minerals. Some plants also have a symbiotic relationship with the soil around it. Mycorrhizae is the relationship between the soil fungus and the plant root system. So by having fungus in the soil and that root system close to one another in the ground, they essentially swap nutrients, so they both benefit, which is what a symbiotic relationship is. With the root organ system, there are two main groups of root systems. One is the fibrous root system, which is a mat of thin roots that are spread out just below the surface. They are shallow in the soil, and they, because of all their branches within the soil, they have increased surface area. Now, it's important to note that plants that have a fibrous root system typically are small or short plants, so they don't, they're not very high above the ground. They're not tall plants. The other type of root system is known as a taproot system, and this has a thick vertical root, only one, and it can have many lateral branch roots off of it, and it firmly anchors the plant into the ground and stores tons of food for the plant, so typically carbohydrates. Now with the taproot system, usually this plant is tall, and it provides anchoring into the ground so it doesn't fall over. And you can see the two diagrams on the bottom, a fibrous root versus a taproot. The carrot stores tons of carbohydrates, and the fibrous root from the green onion is really good for absorption from the soil because of its increased or large surface area. Some roots don't fit into the two organ systems that I just mentioned on the previous slide, the fibrous or the taproot system. So some are known as modified root systems, and these would be adaptations that were developed over time, provided these plants environment, so in allowing them to survive over time. So one type of modified root is the prop root system. And you can see it in the upper left-hand corner. This root system gives the plant extra support that it would need so it doesn't topple over. A radish has a storage root system, so this would be similar to the taproot. Not quite the same, but similar in the fact that it stores food for the plant and lots of water. Another type, just going across the top, are strangling aerial roots, and these types of root system, they take over. So you'll see it almost looks like a ginormous tree, but it has grown, the root system of this plant has grown over a tree and essentially strangled out the tree with the root system. Another type is called the buttress root system, and this would be a type of plant that grows in nutrient-poor soil, so it needs to be above ground in order to obtain the nutrients in order to survive. And the last one in the bottom left, pneumatophore root system, and these are typically, as you can see, like in swampy, wet climates or environments where the root system needs to be able to get oxygen, and it can't do so from the mud or the water where it is, so it has to have a root system above. So again, these are modified root systems, a little bit different from the two main fibrous and taproot system. The second type of organ system that we are going to discuss is the stem system. The main function of the stem system is to display the leaves, but it's not just the purpose of, hey, I'm a plant and I have leaves. The main function in displaying the leaves is to maximize photosynthesis by those leaves. Is a secondary kind of function, also elevates any reproductive structures such as pollen and fruits, is what is what the stem system does. Now, in the stem system, there are several parts that you will need to know, so I would recommend that you study the diagram on the left, and it's on page 577 of your textbook. So please review that diagram as you see to the left. So I'm going to focus on two of the buds in this diagram in the stem organ system. First, the terminal bud. The terminal bud is also known as the apical bud, and what this does is it is growth concentrated at the top end of the stem. So it allows the plant to grow upward. It also secretes a hormone that prevents the growth of auxiliary buds. The growth is directed upwards, as I just said, towards the light. Now, what is the auxiliary buds? These are going to be buds that are located in the V shape between the leaf and the stem, and you can see this in the picture to the left. It forms branches or lateral shoots. So this zone allows the plant to grow outward or be bushy versus being tall. Now, with plants, we also prune them often or pinch parts of them off. And when we do that, we're removing the terminal or apical bud up at the top. So that's going to stunt a little bit of the growth upward, but it would allow the auxiliary growth outward. So when we prune, the plant would become bushier, just not taller, which is a good thing to do to basil, by the way. You don't want your basil to flower, and I can talk more about that later, but basil in the summer. Much like there were modified root systems according to the environment that these plants are living in, there are also modified stem organ systems. So one type is a runner or stolon. Examples are strawberries and grass. And these types of stem systems grow on the surface of the ground, and their primary function is for asexual reproduction. So you can see, hopefully the picture's a little bit small off to the left. It almost looks like long strings kind of shooting out from the strawberry plant. Those are known as runners or stolons. Another type of modified stem adaptation is a rhizome, and rhizomes would include ginger, potatoes, and onions, and these grow underground, and they store food and have DNA for a new plant to grow. And one type of rhizome is a tuber, and that's going to be the end of the rhizome, and potatoes are tubers, which again is a specialized stem system growing underground, and you can see the diagram or the picture actually off to the left. And finally, a bulb is a modified stem. It's an underground shoot. An onion is a bulb, and an onion has storage leaves, so that's what we eat, and it has short underground stem, so it's short as well. The third type of organ system we're going to discuss in a plant is the leaf organ system. The main function of the leaf is for photosynthesis, also for exchanging gases with the environment, and leaves in the plant also need to have defenses set up to prevent herbivores or critters coming in and eating them, which is typically something established within the leaf itself. So you do need to know a little bit of the anatomy of the leaf. So keeping it simple on this slide, one leaf is called the blade, and there are different vein systems that leaves can have. So please refer to page 576 to see the difference between a monocot and a dicot and what their vein systems look like. So pictured here, this would be a dicot leaf. And how I know that, there's a main vein going down the middle, which is known as the midrib, and then there's like branch veins going off of that, whereas a monocot leaf it almost looks just striped. But again, please look in the book for that. The other thing that you need to know about the leaf is what a petiole is. A petiole is going to be the area that joins the leaf to the stem at the node. Again, much like the other two organ systems, there are also modified leaves. Again, adaptations that help the plant to survive in its environment. So one type of modified leaf is a tendril. And tendrils are long, stringy extensions that allow the plant to grab onto things around it, whether it's for climbing, to make sure it gets more photosynthesis. Sometimes it tries to kill plants that are next to it by kind of like choking them with those tendrils. And you can see the pictures of all of these to the left. So tendrils are at the top. Another type is a spine, and spines are things that we always think of being on cactuses or cacti. Spines are actually a modified leaf. Now there are also leaves for storage, and examples would be succulents, which is being shown, could be aloe, anything that, and actually even a cactus, the actual part of it where it stores lots of water and carbohydrates in that, those would be storage leaves. Another type are reproductive leaves, and as you look at this, it looks like a leaf with little mini leaves. The mini leaves are going to drop off and go into the soil, so they're for reproduction. And finally, the last type of modified leaf is a bract. Now, when you see a poinsettia in all the red foliage, you think of a flower, which I certainly do too. But in fact, those red flowers are not really flowers. Those are the leaves. So they have red leaves. The flower of the poinsettia, and you'd have to look really close on this picture, are the yellow inside the center. Those are the flowers. The red is a modified leaf known as a bract. There's going to be 3 types of plant tissues which you need to know. To remind you what a tissue is, it's a group of cells that perform some type of a specialized function. So of the 3 types of plant tissues that you'll need to know, dermal, vascular, and ground. You can see the picture, dermal is going to be, or is, on the outside. Ground tissue will be underneath the dermal tissue, and typically vascular tissue is in the center, not always, but it's within the plant leaf or stem or root. Dermal tissue is a single layer of closely packed cells that cover the entire plant, consisting of a single tissue called the epidermis. Dermal tissue protects against water loss and invasion by pathogens like viruses and bacteria, which can affect plants as well. And often there's a cuticle layer, which is a waxy layer outside that epidermis or dermal tissue. Now, plants that are woody, they do not have an epidermis. They have something known as a periderm instead. Now, something else that you might see along the epidermis or that dermal tissue are called trichomes. And trichomes are hairy, fuzzy-like structures along the epidermis, which also reduce water loss and sometimes secrete chemicals for the plant. The next type of tissue is called the vascular tissue, And this tissue is continuous throughout the plant, and the main function is to transport materials between the roots and the shoots. So the shoot system would be, again, where photosynthesis is taking place. So shuffling that sugar that's being made down into the root system. And anything that's being absorbed from the root system, like water and other nutrients, need to be able to get up into the shoot system for photosynthesis. So the vascular tissue helps to facilitate between those two systems. Now, there's specific names for vascular tissue, xylem and phloem. Now, the xylem helps to get materials to go up into that shoot system. The phloem gets materials to go down into the root system. So how, like when I first learned these, how did I keep xylem versus phloem apart? I always tried to remember that water flows down, like if it spills. So the phloem flows down. So again, the products and everything from photosynthesis goes through the phloem down, and then xylem would just be the opposite of that. Now, the way that the xylem and the phloem are arranged in a plant is known as the stele. So it's all the vascular tissue and kind of how it's organized, and there are different arrangements. So if you look at page 579 in your textbook, the vascular tissue is going to be in and I think I already showed you this picture, but it's in like a purple color. So look in the book and see the different arrangements of that vascular tissue. Again, xylem and phloem. The last type of tissue in a plant is known as ground tissue. So what exactly is ground tissue? It's basically anything that isn't dermal or vascular tissue. So something that isn't necessarily for protection, which is the dermal, or vascular for movement. So the function of ground tissue could be for storage, it could be for photosynthesis, or just giving support to the plant or the other cells and tissues around it. There are two kind of locations or just terms that you need to know in terms of ground tissue. Pith is inside the vascular tissue. So it's again tissue inside that vascular tissue. The cortex is going to be ground tissue that is located outside the vascular tissue. Looking at this picture, you can see the vascular tissue is in the center of this cross section. The ground tissue is surrounding it. So because the ground tissue is surrounding that vascular tissue, that would be known as the cortex ground tissue. I've already briefed you on these cell types in the tissue slide, or on the tissue slide. Cells make up tissue, so that's why they're coming back here. So there are two main cell types in a plant. Again, one is called the xylem, and the xylem conducts the water movement and minerals up from the root. So again, movement in these cells and in the tissue is upward in the xylem. Now, oddly, the xylem, they are dead, tubular, and elongated cells, which will help in the water movement up from the root. And you can read a little bit more about this on page 581 in your book. The second cell type is known as the phloem. Now, I think on the past slide I used water as an example, which probably wasn't the best example. So try to remember that sugar flows down because sugar is primarily what's being shuffled or moved from that shoot system down into the root. So sugar flows down in the phloem. And these cells are living, and again, they aid in the movement of that sugar. And there's two types of phloem cells, sieve tubes and companion cells. Again, these both work hand in hand in trying to shuffle the sugar from the shoot system into the root system. So sieve tubes are types of cells that are sort of empty in a way. They don't have a nucleus, no vacuole, no ribosomes, no cytoskeleton. They're kind of empty, which help in moving sugar molecules, which are big molecules, down again to other parts of the plant. Now, companion cells are attached to these sieve tubes or sieve cells by the plasmodesmata. So that's how they're connected. And companion cells have like all the parts of the cell. So it helps the sieve in order to survive and do all the functions that it needs. But it needs that space. Those sieve cells need that space to be able to move the sugar. So they have a relationship via that plasmodesmata. So combining a little bit of what we learned about leaves, about tissues, and about cells, we're going to put a little bit of it together on this slide. Again, the epidermis of the underside of the plant has interruptions, which are known as stomata. These are the pores. And these pores are surrounded or flanked by guard cells that help that stomata to open and close as it needs. So whether it's for reducing water loss, taking in carbon dioxide, so a little bit more, and this is taking place in the leaf. In the leaf, there's also a type of tissue known as mesophyll, and this is a type of ground tissue that is located between the upper and the lower epidermis. And finally, a type of cell that is in the leaf is called parenchyma, and these are cells that are the site of photosynthesis. And you can see this diagram here. It has a lot of information on it, that it shows you the dermal, ground, and vascular tissues. It shows you different types of cells, xylem and phloem. So please kind of look over this diagram and know a little bit of the terminology.